And out of the blue, this guy calls me and says, you should come and play junior hockey. Now, junior hockey is 20 and under. I was 14 years old. I was a kid still. So I said to my dad, what do you think? And he said, well, let's go watch them practice. So we went and watched them practice. And my dad, I could see him, he was kind of shaking. And my dad smoked cigarettes, and I knew when he was nervous, he'd go out in the back of the arena and he'd be like this, because he didn't want to really smoke in front of me, but he was so nervous, he went outside, oh, you can't play here, you can't play here. And I said, well, let's go practice and try practice. So I practiced with them. I was 14 years old, and they were 19, 20-year-olds. And the coach said, you know, you can play. And I played on that team, and sort of the rest is history.
Your dad told you, I believe at a young age, correct me if I'm wrong, don't go where the puck is, go to where the puck's going to be. So that may not be behind the net, but that was at least how you were looking at the game at a young age. Is that right?
Because I couldn't use size or strength as an advantage. My whole thing had to be brains and smarts. And so I had to always sort of try to be one step ahead. When you're 14 years old playing against men, it's a big difference. You know,
were you worried you weren't going to be big enough to play in the NHL?
To death. My size was always a big sort of issue. People always thought, oh, he's too small, he can't play. I was 5'6", 130 pounds. And my coach at the time, who was a huge influence on my career, his name was Gene Popil. So he says, you should watch Bobby Clarke play hockey. Because in those days, the centerman was a big centerman in front of the net, but Bobby Clarke was this little guy that sort of played in the corner, and that was his game. And I would go down to Maple Leaf Gardens, I'd pay $1 and get standing room, and I watched the warm-up, I watched the game, I watched him play every game on TV, I studied him inside and out. And I became a little Bobby Clarke. I mean, if it wasn't for Bobby Clarke, I probably would never made the NHL.
It's because he was a smaller guy,
and
you were a slight guy.
And I started playing behind the net because of him. And that's how I started to learn to play behind the net. So I used the net as a decoy, whereas in the past, everybody said, well, if you go behind the net, you can't score, you gotta be in front. And that's how I became sort of the player I became because of Bobby Clarke. And so a guy named John Bassett called me, and John Bassett was this old, great Canadian, and he owned, the time, a team in the WHA, the Birmingham Bulls.
This was like a rival?
WHA is like the AFL or ABA.
It was a rival to the NHL.
Yeah. And I remember he sat down and he said, son, here's $100,000 to play the rest of the year. And I said, okay, Mr. Bassett, I'm in. And he said, but your dad has to sign the contract. And I said, okay. So he called my dad, and my dad said, okay, great, you're going back to school. So I said, Mr. Bassett, I can't play. So
wait, that's important, because your dad is this hard-working,
he was like,
grinding
you're going back to grade 11 for the rest of the year. I'm like, well, if it's $100,000, he goes, I said,
so he didn't want to jump at that.
My dad was always under the understanding of, like every other father in those days, go to school, get your education, play sports, and that's fine. But you had to get your education. So turned it down, went back to high school that year, finished, and then Nelson called. So this guy named Nelson Scalbania phoned me out of the blue, said, would you like to play professional hockey? I'm like, yeah.
So Scalbania says, do you want to come play for my then Indianapolis Racers?
Yeah. We flew to Vancouver, my mom, my dad, and I. We get to the house, and he goes, you think you can play with men? And I go, yeah, I can. Yeah, I wouldn't be here if I didn't think I could. And he goes, okay. And we went on an 8-mile run. I couldn't run 8 miles today. Got back to the house, and he said, okay, whatever you want. If you can run 8 miles, you can play professional hockey. If I didn't run the 8 miles, I think he would have said, go home. So I said to my dad, I said, Dad, can I borrow $50? I got no money. He goes, here's $200. I know you're good for it now.
What was the deal for? Well, how much did you sign for?
I actually got a $350,000 signing bonus in 1978.